Well, well. Looks like they're recruiting from beauty pageants now.
Captain Derek Bulldog Williams's voice boomed across the weapons training facility at Fort Davidson, his cruel laughter echoing off the concrete walls. Every head in the room turned toward the small figure standing near the equipment rack. Rachel Thompson, her blonde hair pulled back in a messy high bun, wearing a simple gray t-shirt that seemed 2 sizes too big for her delicate frame. The morning sun streaming through the high windows caught the natural freckles across her porcelain cheeks as she clutched a worn duffel bag, her blue eyes scanning the room with what looked like nervous uncertainty. To everyone watching, she appeared exactly as Derek intended, a lost beauty queen who'd somehow wandered into a warrior's domain. Seriously, Derek continued, his massive frame casting a shadow over Rachel as he approached, the green camouflage of his uniform stretched tight across his muscular chest. Did someone mistake this for a modeling audition? The 12 elite special forces candidates erupted in harsh laughter, their voices mixing with the metallic clanking of weapons being assembled around them. Rachel said nothing. She simply adjusted her grip on the bag's frayed strap and took a small step back, the movement so subtle it might have been mistaken for fear. But in exactly 18 minutes, when that torn shirt revealed what was hidden beneath, every single person in that training facility would understand they had just witnessed the most dangerous mistake of their military careers. The black serpent coiled around her right arm would change everything they thought they knew about strength, about deception, and about the price of underestimating someone who looked like she belonged anywhere but here. Derek's reputation at Fort Davidson was legendary, though not always for the right reasons. At 6 feet 4 inches of solid muscle, he'd dominated every physical challenge the military had thrown at him. His service record read like a recruiting poster: decorated combat veteran, expert marksman, leader of men. But behind the perfect facade lurked something darker, a need for control that went beyond military discipline into the realm of psychological manipulation. He'd built his identity on being untouchable, unbeatable, the gold standard against which all other soldiers were measured. The moment Rachel Thompson's name appeared on his training roster, something had shifted in Derek's demeanor. Perhaps it was the way her personnel files seemed deliberately sparse, or how Colonel Patterson had personally requested she be included in the advanced tactical program, despite her apparent lack of combat experience. Or maybe it was simply that her presence threatened the carefully constructed hierarchy he'd spent years building. "All right, Princess," Derek announced, his voice dripping with condescension as he gestured toward the weapons rack. "Time to see what they're teaching in finishing school these days." He grabbed a black case from the bottom shelf, one that had been gathering dust for months. Inside lay an M4 carbine that had seen better decades, the barrel slightly warped from overheating, the stock held together with military-grade tape, and a firing mechanism so worn it had a half-inch of play before engaging. Rachel approached the weapon with measured steps, her combat boots making soft sounds against the concrete floor. As she lifted the rifle from its case, something flickered across her features. Not fear or confusion, but what might have been recognition. Her fingers found the weapon's balance point immediately, and she performed what appeared to be a routine safety check, with movements that were almost too smooth, too automatic for someone supposedly unfamiliar with advanced weaponry. "Holy cow," whispered Sergeant Tyler Brooks, a lean man with sharp eyes who had been watching from nearby. "Look at how she's holding it." But his observation was drowned out by Derek's continued mockery. "Careful there, Barbie," Derek taunted. "Wouldn't want to break a nail on that trigger guard." The laughter that followed was harsh and calculated, designed to establish dominance and make clear where Rachel stood in the social hierarchy of warriors. If you're already feeling that burn of injustice watching Rachel face this humiliation, hit that like button right now and subscribe, because this story is about to take you on a roller coaster of emotions you won't believe. And I'm genuinely curious, where are you watching this from? Drop your country in the comments below. I love connecting with viewers from all corners of the world who appreciate stories of hidden strength. Rachel set the rifle down with the same careful precision she'd shown when lifting it, her movements economical and purposeful. She began arranging her equipment with an efficiency that seemed at odds with her supposedly inexperienced status. Her gear was laid out in a specific pattern, ammunition arranged by type and condition, cleaning supplies positioned for easy access, protective equipment organized according to some internal logic that spoke of countless repetitions. Lieutenant Amy Johnson, observing from across the training bay, felt a prickle of curiosity. Amy had served 2 tours in Afghanistan and recognized the setup pattern Rachel was using. It was standard operating procedure for long-range reconnaissance teams, units that spent weeks in hostile territory, where equipment organization could mean the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "She's setting up like she's going on a 3-week patrol," Amy murmured to herself. Then louder, "Thompson, where did you learn that arrangement pattern?" Rachel glanced up briefly, her blue eyes meeting Amy's for just a moment. "Just seemed logical," she replied quietly, but Amy caught something in that gaze, a depth that didn't match the nervous recruit persona. Derek, meanwhile, was growing increasingly agitated by the attention Rachel was receiving. His need for control demanded that she be dismissed, humiliated, and ultimately removed from his domain. He had built his identity on being the alpha predator in any military environment, and Rachel's very presence seemed to challenge that carefully constructed image. "You know what?" Derek announced, his voice rising to ensure everyone in the facility could hear. "Let's give our little princess here a proper welcome. Stevens," he called to the quartermaster, a grizzled older man who'd been issuing equipment with barely concealed disdain. "Make sure Thompson here gets the full VIP treatment." Quartermaster Stevens grinned, understanding the implied message. He selected the most worn gear from his inventory, a tactical vest that had seen too many training exercises, boots that were a size too large, and protective equipment that barely met minimum safety standards. The message was clear. Rachel didn't deserve quality gear because she didn't belong among real soldiers. As Rachel strapped on the oversized vest, her movements revealed something that only the most observant watchers noticed. Despite the ill-fitting equipment, she adjusted the straps with a specific technique that transformed the loose gear into a functional, properly distributed load-bearing system. Her fingers worked with muscle memory that spoke of extensive experience with tactical equipment modification. Master Sergeant Thompson, a 30-year veteran who'd trained more special operations candidates than he could count, found himself studying Rachel's technique with growing interest. "That's not standard adjustment protocol," he muttered to his assistant instructor. "That's field improvisation, advanced stuff." The first official exercise was weapons familiarization and maintenance, a basic test that every Special Forces candidate was expected to pass with flying colors. Derek positioned himself where he could oversee Rachel's performance, expecting to catch her making the kinds of mistakes that would justify her removal from the program. 30 seconds to field strip, clean, and reassemble, Derek announced, starting his stopwatch with theatrical flair. "Standard military evaluation. Think you can handle it, princess?" Rachel nodded once and began. What happened next left even the most experienced instructors speechless. Her hands moved with impossible precision and speed, dismantling the M4 carbine like she was following a choreographed routine she'd performed thousands of times. Each component was removed, inspected, and cleaned with movements that were both economical and absolutely certain. The weapon came apart in her hands, like it was eager to cooperate, pieces arranged in perfect order for reassembly. She didn't pause to think or remember the next step. Her muscle memory guided every motion with the kind of fluid confidence that only came from extensive experience under pressure. 23 seconds later, the rifle was fully reassembled, function checked, and ready for operation. The silence in the training bay was profound. Derek stared at his stopwatch, then at Rachel, then back at the timepiece as if it might be lying. "Run it again," he commanded, his voice tight with something that might have been concern. Rachel complied without comment. 21 seconds this time. Not only had she beaten her previous time, but she'd done it while correcting a deliberate error Derek had introduced into the weapon's assembly during the previous disassembly, a test within a test that she'd identified and fixed without being told it was there. "Where the hell did you learn to do that?" Tyler Brooks demanded, his earlier mockery replaced by genuine confusion and a growing respect he was trying hard to suppress. Rachel looked up from the reassembled weapon, her blue eyes calm and unreadable. "Practice," she said simply, as if that single word explained everything. But practice alone couldn't account for what they'd witnessed. The kind of speed and precision Rachel had demonstrated took years to develop, typically under combat conditions where mistakes resulted in immediate and lethal consequences. Her performance suggested extensive experience with weapons maintenance in high-stress environments. Exactly the kind of background that should have appeared in her personnel file, but was mysteriously absent. Private Jackson, one of Derek's most loyal followers, attempted to salvage his leader's dominance. "Lucky break," he announced loudly. "Bet she can't do it blindfolded like a real operator." It was meant as a joke, another way to diminish Rachel's achievement and restore the social order Derek demanded. But Rachel surprised everyone by nodding slightly. "If you'd like," she said quietly. The challenge hung in the air like smoke from gunfire. Derek found himself trapped between his need to maintain dominance and a growing suspicion that he might have seriously underestimated his target. But backing down wasn't in his nature, and the watching crowd demanded resolution. "Fine," he snapped. "But when you fail, and you will fail, you pack your bags and transfer out of my program. Deal?" Rachel considered this for a moment, then nodded once. "Deal." Amy Johnson provided a tactical blindfold, the kind used in advanced training exercises. As it was secured over Rachel's eyes, she seemed to transform. The nervous, uncertain posture disappeared, replaced by something more centered and professional. She stood with perfect military bearing, her breathing steady and controlled. The blindfolded disassembly began, and what they witnessed transcended mere skill. Rachel's hands moved with supernatural confidence, each motion precise and purposeful. She wasn't feeling her way through the process. She was following an internal map built from countless repetitions, under conditions that demanded perfection. 19 seconds. Not only had she beaten her previous times, but she'd done it without sight, in front of an audience that was rapidly reevaluating everything they thought they knew about the quiet woman in the oversized gray t-shirt. When the blindfold came off, Rachel's expression remained neutral, almost bored, as if the demonstration she'd just given, one that would have been impressive for a veteran special operations soldier, was simply routine. Derek's face had flushed red, his carefully constructed dominance cracking under the pressure of undeniable evidence that Rachel was far more than she appeared. His psychological need for control was warring with a growing realization that he might have encountered something beyond his understanding or ability to manage. Rachel's hands moved with the precision that came from using military-grade medical stabilization technology. The advanced nerve stabilization devices originally developed for combat surgeons operating under fire had been adapted for special forces operatives dealing with combat-related tremors. These carbon fiber wrist braces with micro-servo adjustments could compensate for neurological damage while maintaining the fine motor control necessary for weapon operation in high-stress environments. The afternoon brought live fire exercises, and Derek saw his opportunity to regain control. If Rachel could handle weapons maintenance with supernatural skill, surely she would falter when it came to actual marksmanship with a deliberately damaged rifle. The M4 he'd assigned her wasn't just old and worn, it had been specifically selected for its flaws. "Time to see if you can actually hit something, princess," Derek announced as they moved to the outdoor range. "Hope you're not afraid of a little noise." The Fort Davidson rifle range stretched out across 200 meters of carefully maintained grounds. Targets were positioned at varying distances, from basic 50-meter qualification standards to advanced long-range precision shooting at distances that challenged even experienced marksmen. The morning's earlier fog had lifted, leaving perfect visibility and minimal wind, conditions that eliminated external excuses for poor performance. Rachel accepted her assigned rifle and ammunition without comment, though several observers noticed how she examined each round with subtle attention to detail. She wasn't just checking for obvious damage, she was evaluating powder charges, bullet weight variations, and case condition with the kind of thoroughness that spoke of someone who understood that ammunition quality could affect accuracy at ranges where millimeters mattered. "Standard qualification course first," announced Instructor Martinez, a compact man whose own marksmanship credentials were legendary throughout the special operations community. 50 rounds at varying distances. Minimum passing score is 80% accuracy. Derek positioned himself where he could observe Rachel's technique, expecting to find flaws that would justify the mockery he'd been heaping upon her. Instead, he found himself watching something that challenged his understanding of marksmanship fundamentals. Rachel's stance was textbook perfect, but beyond that, there were subtle elements that spoke of advanced training. Her breathing pattern was controlled and rhythmic, designed to minimize movement during the critical moment of trigger squeeze. Her grip was firm but not tense, allowing the weapon to recoil naturally without fighting its movement. Most tellingly, she was making micro-adjustments to her aim that compensated for the known flaws in her assigned rifle. The first shot rang out, followed immediately by a call from the target pit. 10 rings, center mass. Derek frowned. One accurate shot could be luck, especially at 50 meters. But as Rachel continued firing, a pattern emerged that couldn't be explained by chance. Shot after shot found the target's center, creating a group that would have been impressive with a match-grade rifle. With the damaged weapon she'd been assigned, it was approaching the impossible. "She's compensating for the barrel warp," Master Sergeant Thompson observed quietly to Martinez. "Look at her aim point. She's holding 3 inches left to account for the rifle's tendency to throw shots right. That's not beginner's luck. That's experience." By the time Rachel had fired all 50 rounds, she'd achieved a perfect score. Not just passing, not just excellent, but absolutely perfect accuracy with a rifle that should have made precision shooting impossible. The mathematical probability of achieving such results by chance was so low as to be meaningless. Derek stared at the target results, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. His carefully laid trap had not only failed, but had provided Rachel with an opportunity to demonstrate capabilities that raised serious questions about her background and training. "Run the advanced course," he commanded, his voice tight with frustration and growing suspicion. 200 meters, moving targets, time pressure. Let's see how she handles real stress. Are you starting to piece together the clues? Something tells me you're smarter than Derek and his crew. If you're getting that tingling feeling that Rachel is more than she appears, smash that like button and let me know in the comments what you think is really going on here. The Advanced Marksmanship course was designed to separate competent soldiers from truly exceptional ones. Targets appeared at random intervals at varying distances, remained visible for limited time windows, and moved in unpredictable patterns. Success required not just accuracy, but the ability to rapidly acquire targets, calculate range and movement, and deliver precise shots under time pressure. Rachel approached the firing line with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout the day. As the exercise began, her transformation was subtle but unmistakable. The uncertain recruit persona fell away, replaced by something more focused and purposeful. The first target appeared at 150 meters, moving left to right at a walking pace. Rachel's shot was immediate and instinctive, the bullet arriving at precisely the point where the target would be, not where it appeared to be. The kind of predictive shooting that required extensive experience with moving targets in combat conditions. Target after target fell to single shots, each one placed with surgical precision despite the challenging conditions and defective rifle. Rachel wasn't just hitting the targets, she was placing her shots in specific zones that would have been immediately effective against human opponents. Center mass for body shots, precise headshots when that was the only target available, and disabling shots to extremities when the tactical situation called for non-lethal intervention. Amy Johnson found herself studying Rachel's technique with professional interest. "She's not shooting like someone trying to qualify," Amy murmured to herself. "She's shooting like someone who's done this for real." The exercise concluded with Rachel having achieved another perfect score, this time under conditions that had challenged veteran special operations soldiers. The silence that followed was pregnant with questions that no one seemed willing to voice directly. Derek's frustration had evolved into something darker and more dangerous. His psychological need for dominance was being systematically dismantled by evidence he couldn't ignore or explain away. The woman he'd intended to humiliate and dismiss was proving herself superior to his best soldiers in every measurable way. Colonel Robert Patterson had been observing the day's exercises from a distance, his attention drawn by reports from his instructors about Rachel's unusual performance. As Fort Davidson's commanding officer, Patterson had seen thousands of soldiers pass through advanced training programs. He recognized exceptional talent when he saw it, but Rachel's demonstrations went beyond exceptional into territory that raised serious questions about her background and training. Patterson's years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts, and those instincts were now screaming that Rachel Thompson was not what she appeared to be. The disparity between her personnel file and her demonstrated capabilities was too significant to be coincidental. Someone with her level of training and experience didn't simply appear from nowhere without leaving traces in official records. That evening, Patterson initiated a discreet inquiry into Rachel's background, using channels that went well beyond standard personnel databases. What he found, or rather, what he didn't find, only deepened the mystery. Rachel Thompson's official military record was remarkably thin for someone who would presumably acquired such advanced skills through legitimate training programs. Meanwhile, Derek was conducting his own investigation, driven by a growing obsession with maintaining his dominance over the training program. He'd built his identity on being the ultimate alpha predator in any military environment, and Rachel's continued success threatened the very foundation of his self-image. Late that night, Derek accessed personnel files that were technically beyond his authorization level, using contacts and favors accumulated over years of political maneuvering within the military hierarchy. What he discovered made his blood run cold with a mixture of fear and rage that would drive his actions in the days to come. The next morning brought advanced tactical exercises designed to test decision-making under pressure. The scenario was straightforward: a hostage rescue situation requiring precise coordination between team members, flawless execution of complex maneuvers, and the ability to adapt quickly to changing conditions. Derek assigned himself as team leader, with Rachel relegated to a supporting role that was designed to minimize her impact on the exercise outcome. He intended to demonstrate that individual marksmanship skills meant nothing without proper leadership and tactical awareness. The exercise began with intelligence briefing and mission planning. As Derek outlined his approach to the simulated rescue, Rachel listened without comment, her expression neutral and attentive. But those watching closely noticed subtle signs of disagreement: slight shifts in posture, brief glances toward alternative approaches, minute reactions that suggested she was analyzing the plan and finding it wanting. "Any questions or suggestions?" Derek asked with mock sincerity, expecting either silence or easily dismissed amateur observations. Rachel raised her hand slightly. "The approach route exposes the team to enfilade fire from the secondary building," she said quietly. "Alternative path through the maintenance area provides better cover and multiple exit options." Derek's jaw tightened. "The maintenance route is longer and more complex. Real soldiers don't need to hide behind cover every step of the way. Real soldiers don't get killed by preventable mistakes," Rachel replied, her voice still quiet but carrying an edge that made several team members exchange glances. The tension in the room was palpable as Derek and Rachel engaged in what was ostensibly a tactical discussion, but felt more like a battle for authority. Derek's approach prioritized speed and aggression, tactics that had served him well in previous exercises, but ignored several potential complications that Rachel had identified. Amy Johnson found herself nodding as Rachel spoke, recognizing the kind of tactical thinking that came from extensive experience in hostile environments. "She's right about the fields of fire," Amy whispered to Tyler Brooks. "Derek's plan leaves us exposed for at least 30 seconds with no cover." The exercise proceeded according to Derek's plan, with predictable results. 3 minutes into the mission, the team found itself pinned down by simulated enemy fire from exactly the positions Rachel had identified as threats. What should have been a swift rescue operation devolved into a prolonged firefight that resulted in multiple simulated casualties and mission failure. "Reset and try again," announced the exercise controller, his disappointment evident. "Team leader will modify approach based on lessons learned." Derek's face was flushed with anger and humiliation. Being forced to acknowledge the validity of Rachel's tactical assessment was a blow to his carefully constructed image of infallible leadership. But military protocol demanded that he adapt his plan to address the identified weaknesses. The second attempt followed Rachel's suggested route, with results that were immediately apparent. The team moved through the maintenance area with minimal exposure to enemy observation, reached their objective without casualties, and successfully completed the rescue operation within the specified time parameters. As the exercise concluded, several team members approached Rachel with questions about her tactical observations and alternative approaches. Her responses demonstrated a depth of understanding that went far beyond basic military training, incorporating lessons that could only have been learned through extensive experience in actual combat situations. Derek watched this informal debriefing session with growing alarm. His authority as team leader was being undermined by a recruit who was supposedly learning these concepts for the first time. The psychological foundations of his dominance were cracking under the pressure of undeniable evidence that Rachel possessed superior knowledge and experience. The specialized insurance coverage for classified military operations extended beyond standard combat benefits. Comprehensive protection plans designed for deep cover operatives included identity protection, asset security, and family protection services that could withstand even the most thorough background investigations. These premium insurance packages provided complete financial security for operatives whose official records needed to remain classified for national security purposes. That afternoon brought individual performance evaluations, one-on-one assessments designed to identify each candidate's strengths and weaknesses in various military specialties. Derek had arranged to conduct Rachel's evaluation personally, seeing it as an opportunity to reassert his authority and identify flaws that could justify her removal from the program. The evaluation began with physical fitness assessments, standard military exercises that tested strength, endurance, and agility. Rachel's performance was competent but not exceptional, fitting her cover as someone with basic military fitness but no specialized training. Her times and scores were consistently in the acceptable range without drawing attention to superior capabilities. Derek pushed the physical challenges harder than protocol required, adding extra repetitions and extended time requirements that bordered on harassment. But Rachel adapted to each escalation without complaint, meeting every challenge with quiet determination that frustrated Derek's attempts to break her composure. "Combat medical training," Derek announced, producing a training mannequin and a field medical kit. "Let's see how you handle treating traumatic injuries under pressure." This was another trap, an area where Derek expected Rachel to fail decisively. Combat medical training was specialized knowledge that required extensive instruction and practice. Without proper background, she should struggle with even basic life-saving procedures. Rachel approached the medical assessment with the same calm professionalism she'd shown in other areas. As Derek described increasingly complex trauma scenarios, she responded with treatment protocols that were not just correct, but reflected advanced medical training that went well beyond standard military first aid. She demonstrated techniques for treating pneumothorax, performing emergency surgical procedures, and managing multiple casualties in austere environments. Her knowledge included specific medications, proper dosages, and advanced life support procedures that were typically known only to highly trained combat medics and special operations personnel. "Where did you learn advanced trauma medicine?" Derek demanded, his voice tight with frustration and growing suspicion. "Cross-training program," Rachel replied simply, but the explanation didn't satisfy Derek's growing certainty that there was much more to her background than official records indicated. The psychological evaluation was Derek's final attempt to identify weaknesses he could exploit. Using techniques he'd learned through advanced interrogation training, he probed for emotional triggers, traumatic experiences, and psychological vulnerabilities that could be used to undermine Rachel's composure. But Rachel deflected every psychological probe with responses that were cooperative without being revealing, forthcoming without providing ammunition for future attacks. She answered questions directly and completely, while somehow managing to reveal nothing significant about her background or motivations. Derek found himself increasingly frustrated by Rachel's psychological resilience. Every technique he'd used successfully against other candidates failed to produce the desired cracks in her composure. If anything, his attempts at psychological pressure seemed to strengthen her resolve and deepen her calm professionalism. As the evaluation concluded, Derek was forced to acknowledge that Rachel had exceeded standards in every measurable category. Her performance was not just competent, but demonstrated capabilities that raised serious questions about her background and training. Questions that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore or explain away. That evening, Derek's obsession with Rachel had evolved into something approaching paranoia. He'd built his entire identity on being the ultimate predator in any military environment, and her continued success threatened the psychological foundations of his self-image. The possibility that she might be superior to him in ways he couldn't understand or control was becoming unbearable. Late that night, Derek made the decision that would ultimately expose his own dark secrets and bring his carefully constructed world crashing down. Using contacts and military intelligence that he'd cultivated through years of political maneuvering, he initiated an unauthorized background investigation into Rachel Thompson's true identity. What he discovered in classified databases that should have been beyond his access level filled him with a mixture of terror and rage. Rachel Thompson was not just a talented recruit, she was something far more dangerous than he'd ever imagined. The revelation would drive him to make the desperate choices that would ultimately expose his own criminal activities and destroy everything he'd worked to build. Hold on to your seats, because what happens next is going to blow your mind. If you're as invested in Rachel's story as I am, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on. You definitely don't want to miss how this unfolds. The following morning brought the most challenging exercise yet, a live fire combat simulation designed to test decision-making under extreme pressure. The scenario was based on actual combat situations, incorporating the chaos, confusion, and split-second timing that defined real battlefield conditions. Derek saw this as his final opportunity to regain control over the situation. In the controlled environment of marksmanship and tactical exercises, Rachel had consistently outperformed expectations. But combat simulations introduced variables that couldn't be practiced or memorized. They required instinctive responses built from actual experience under fire. The exercise area was a mock urban environment, complete with multi-story buildings, narrow alleys, and civilian areas that required careful consideration of rules of engagement. Hidden throughout the complex were opposing force members armed with simulation rounds, designed to provide realistic enemy contact without lethal consequences. "This is where we separate the warriors from the pretenders," Derek announced to the assembled team. "Live fire exercise means live ammunition for certain phases, simulation rounds for force on force, but real bullets for target engagement. One mistake and someone goes to the hospital." Rachel listened to the briefing with the same calm attention she'd shown throughout her time at Fort Davidson, but several observers noticed subtle changes in her demeanor. Her breathing patterns shifted to something more controlled and rhythmic. Her posture became more centered and balanced. Her eyes began conducting systematic sweeps of the environment, cataloging details with the kind of automatic awareness that spoke of extensive experience in hostile territory. Amy Johnson, assigned as Rachel's battle buddy for the exercise, found herself studying these changes with growing fascination. "You've done this before, haven't you?" she asked quietly during equipment preparation. Rachel glanced at Amy, and for just a moment, something flickered in her blue eyes, a depth of experience that didn't match her supposed background. "We all have training," she replied, but the answer was carefully neutral, designed to deflect rather than inform. The exercise began with the team moving through the urban environment, following Derek's predetermined route toward their objective. Within minutes, they encountered their first opposition, simulated enemy forces positioned in a building that overlooked their approach. Derek's response was immediate and aggressive, ordering a frontal assault that would have overwhelmed the enemy through sheer firepower and determination. It was the kind of approach that had worked in previous exercises, where scenarios were designed to reward bold action over careful planning. But this time, the opposition was prepared for aggressive tactics. The team found itself caught in a crossfire that quickly devolved into a chaotic firefight with multiple casualties and compromised mission objectives. "Fall back and regroup," Derek commanded, his voice tight with frustration. The exercise had gone wrong almost immediately, and his preferred tactical approach was proving inadequate against a well-prepared enemy. During the brief respite, Rachel approached Derek with a tactical assessment that was delivered quietly but contained information that could only have come from extensive combat experience. She had identified enemy positions, assessed their capabilities, and developed alternative approaches that addressed the tactical problems Derek's plan had failed to anticipate. "How can you possibly know all that?" Derek demanded. "You've been under fire for 5 minutes, and you're making assessments like you've been studying this for hours." Rachel's response was delivered in the same quiet tone she'd used throughout her time at Fort Davidson, but the content revealed knowledge that went far beyond basic military training. She described enemy movement patterns, tactical preferences, and vulnerability assessments with the kind of detail that suggested extensive experience in similar situations. The second attempt at the objective followed Rachel's tactical recommendations, with results that were immediately apparent. The team moved through alternative routes that avoided enemy strong points, used coordinated suppression fire to control enemy movement, and ultimately achieved mission success with minimal casualties. As the exercise concluded, Derek found himself facing undeniable evidence that Rachel possessed tactical knowledge and combat experience that far exceeded anything in her official records. The disparity between her supposed background and demonstrated capabilities had reached a point where casual explanations were no longer credible. Colonel Patterson had been monitoring the exercise from the command center, watching through multiple camera angles as events unfolded. Rachel's performance had been exceptional, but more than that, it had demonstrated capabilities that suggested extensive experience in actual combat situations. "Run a complete background check," Patterson ordered his intelligence officer. "I want to know everything about Thompson, where she trained, who her instructors were, what units she's served with. Something doesn't add up here." The intelligence officer, Captain Hayes, nodded grimly. He'd already begun preliminary investigations into Rachel's background, and what he had found, or rather, what he hadn't found, was deeply troubling. "Sir, her official record is remarkably thin. Standard basic training, no specialized schools, no combat deployments. But her performance suggests advanced training that should have left extensive documentation. Patterson frowned, his years of experience telling him that they were dealing with something far more complex than a typical training program irregularity. Expand the search parameters, check classified databases, special operations records, anything that might explain what we're seeing. Meanwhile, Derek's investigation into Rachel's background had yielded information that filled him with a mixture of terror and rage. Using contacts in military intelligence who owed him favors from his own classified operations, he'd accessed databases that revealed the truth about Rachel Thompson's identity. The woman he'd been trying to humiliate and dismiss was not just a talented recruit. She was a former member of Shadow Viper, one of the most elite and secretive special operations units in the military. A unit that had been officially disbanded after a classified operation went catastrophically wrong, resulting in the supposed deaths of all team members. But the intelligence reports Derek accessed revealed a more complex truth. Shadow Viper hadn't simply been eliminated, it had been betrayed. Someone had leaked operational details to enemy forces, resulting in an ambush that should have killed everyone involved. The fact that Rachel Thompson was alive and operating under a cover identity suggested that the betrayal investigation was still ongoing. Derek's hands shook as he read the classified reports, understanding for the first time that he was dealing with something far more dangerous than an overachieving recruit. Rachel wasn't just talented. She was a highly trained operative who was almost certainly investigating the very betrayal that had destroyed her unit. The realization that Rachel might be investigating him specifically sent Derek into a spiral of paranoia and desperate planning. His own involvement in the Shadow Viper betrayal had been carefully hidden through layers of misdirection and false documentation. But if Rachel was as skilled as her performance suggested, she might be capable of uncovering evidence that could destroy him completely. That night, Derek made the decision that would ultimately lead to his downfall. Unable to remove Rachel through normal channels and terrified that she might expose his criminal activities, he decided to arrange an accident during the next day's live fire exercise. A training mishap that would eliminate the threat she represented, while appearing to be nothing more than unfortunate timing. But Derek had underestimated both Rachel's capabilities and the extent of the investigation already underway. Colonel Patterson's background check had yielded results that placed Rachel's presence at Fort Davidson in an entirely different context, while Agent Michelle Davis had been monitoring the situation from the shadows, ready to intervene if Rachel's cover was compromised. The stage was set for a confrontation that would expose years of hidden crimes, reveal the truth about Shadow Viper's destruction, and demonstrate that sometimes the most dangerous person in any situation is the one who appears weakest and most vulnerable. As dawn broke over Fort Davidson on what would prove to be the most important day in the base's history, Rachel Thompson prepared for exercises that would finally reveal who she really was and why she'd come to hunt the predator who thought he was stalking her. The black serpent tattoo coiled around her right arm remained hidden beneath the gray t-shirt, but soon it would be exposed for all to see, along with the truth about what happened when real warriors were forced to reveal themselves. The morning of the live ammunition exercise dawned gray and overcast, with low clouds that seemed to press down on Fort Davidson like a physical weight. Rachel Thompson stood at her assigned equipment station, methodically checking her gear with movements that had become increasingly precise over the past week. What the observers didn't realize was that each day had brought her closer to the truth she'd come here to uncover. Derek Williams paced the preparation area like a caged predator, his agitation barely contained beneath his professional military bearing. The unauthorized intelligence search he'd conducted the previous night had revealed information that transformed his perception of Rachel from annoying recruit to existential threat, but it had also provided him with the justification he needed for the desperate action he was planning. "Listen up, people," Derek announced, his voice carrying across the assembly area with forced authority. "Today's exercise is live fire urban combat simulation. Real ammunition, real consequences. One mistake, and you're not going home to tell your families about it." His eyes lingered on Rachel as he spoke, the implied threat unmistakable to anyone paying attention. Master Sergeant Thompson, the senior instructor whose 30 years of experience had made him a legend in special operations training circles, noticed the tension between Derek and Rachel with growing concern. Something about the dynamic felt wrong, less like normal instructor-student friction and more like predator-prey positioning that could turn dangerous without warning. The exercise scenario was complex and demanding, a multi-building urban environment where teams would be required to clear hostile forces, secure civilians, and accomplish mission objectives under time pressure. It was the kind of test that separated competent soldiers from exceptional ones, and Derek had designed the parameters specifically to create situations where Rachel would be forced to reveal capabilities that went beyond her supposed background. Rachel's assigned team included Amy Johnson, Tyler Brooks, and Private Rodriguez, a mix of experience levels that should have created natural command hierarchy issues. But as they conducted their pre-mission briefing, something interesting emerged. Despite Rachel's supposedly junior status, the other team members found themselves deferring to her tactical assessments and suggestions for mission planning. The approach through the main street exposes us to observation from at least 4 potential sniper positions, Rachel noted quietly, studying the terrain model with eyes that seemed to catalog every detail automatically. Alternative routes through the service alley provides concealment and multiple egress options if we encounter heavy resistance. Amy found herself nodding as Rachel spoke, recognizing the kind of tactical thinking that came from extensive experience in hostile urban environments. "You're right about the sightlines," she agreed. "Standard doctrine would be to suppress those positions before advancing, but we don't have enough personnel for effective overwatch." Tyler Brooks, who'd spent the past week oscillating between mockery and growing respect for Rachel's abilities, studied the proposed route with professional interest. "Service alley puts us close to civilian areas," he observed. "Rules of engagement become more complex if we encounter non-combatants, which is why we need to be prepared for close-quarters engagement with precision fire," Rachel replied. "Minimize collateral damage while maintaining mission effectiveness." The casual way she discussed urban combat tactics revealed knowledge that should have taken years to acquire through actual operational experience. Derek, monitoring the team briefings from a distance, felt his paranoia intensify as he watched Rachel's natural assumption of tactical leadership. Every word she spoke demonstrated knowledge that contradicted her official background, confirming his growing certainty that she was far more dangerous than she appeared. The exercise began with teams moving into their assigned sectors, weapons loaded with live ammunition and simulation rounds, depending on the specific engagement parameters. Rachel's team entered the urban environment through their chosen service alley, moving with coordinated precision that impressed the observing instructors. Within minutes, they encountered their first challenge: simulated civilian hostages being held by opposing force members in a building that required careful approach to avoid triggering a massacre scenario. The situation demanded split-second decision-making under pressure, exactly the kind of test that revealed true capabilities. Rachel's response was immediate and instinctive. She identified sniper positions, assessed enemy movement patterns, and developed a coordinated assault plan that would minimize civilian casualties while achieving tactical objectives. Her commands were delivered quietly, but with absolute authority, and her team responded with the kind of immediate compliance that spoke to her natural leadership presence. The engagement that followed was a masterpiece of urban combat tactics. Rachel's team moved through the building with practiced efficiency, neutralizing threats with precision fire while protecting non-combatants through careful positioning and controlled violence. It was the kind of performance that military professionals would study for years afterward, as an example of perfect execution under pressure. Derek watched the engagement unfold through multiple camera feeds, his face growing darker with each display of Rachel's exceptional capabilities. What should have been a challenging test for an inexperienced soldier had become a demonstration of skills that rivaled the best special operations professionals he'd ever observed. "Holy cow," whispered one of the monitoring instructors. "She's running that team like she's done this 100 times before. Look at the coordination, the fire discipline, the tactical awareness. Where did she learn to fight like that?" Colonel Patterson, observing from the command center, felt the same mixture of admiration and suspicion that had been growing throughout Rachel's time at Fort Davidson. The disparity between her official records and demonstrated capabilities had reached a point where explanations based on natural BIST or exceptional training were no longer credible. "Captain Hayes," Patterson called to his intelligence officer. "Any progress on the background investigation?" Hayes approached with a classified folder, his expression grim. "Sir, we've hit multiple walls and official channels. but using expanded search parameters, we found references to classified operations that might explain what we're seeing. Shadow Viper Unit, disbanded 3 years ago after a catastrophic mission failure. All members presume KIA. Patterson's blood ran cold as he processed the implications. Shadow Viper had been one of the most elite special operations units in the military, specializing in deep reconnaissance and targeted elimination missions that never appeared in official records. If Rachel Thompson had connections to that unit, her presence at Fort Davidson took on an entirely different significance. Meanwhile, Derek had made his decision. Unable to remove Rachel through normal channels and terrified that she might expose his criminal activities, he was preparing to stage an accident during the urban combat exercise. A stray round during the confusion of close quarters battle, an unfortunate ricochet that would eliminate the threat she represented while appearing to be nothing more than tragic training mishap. But Derek had underestimated the extent of the investigation already underway. Agent Michelle Davis, who'd been monitoring the situation from concealed positions throughout Fort Davidson, recognized the signs of escalating paranoia in Derek's behavior. Her mission parameters included protecting Rachel's cover, but they also authorized direct intervention if the operation was compromised by hostile action. Advanced tactical training programs offered certification in specialized combat techniques that weren't available through conventional military channels. These elite educational systems combine psychological warfare, advanced marksmanship, and covert operations training into comprehensive courses designed for the highest levels of Special Forces operations. Legal consultation services ensured all training remained within classified operational parameters. The afternoon phase of the exercise introduced time pressure and equipment failures designed to test adaptability under stress. Rachel's team found themselves dealing with communication breakdowns, ammunition shortages, and wounded team members who required immediate medical attention while under fire. Rachel's response to these challenges provided the most compelling evidence yet of her advanced training and experience. She improvised communication methods using hand signals and tactical positioning, managed ammunition distribution to maximize team effectiveness, and provided medical treatment that went well beyond standard military first aid. "She's treating a sucking chest wound like she's done it before," observed Dr. Sarah Wilson, the base medical officer who was monitoring the exercise for safety purposes. "That's advanced trauma medicine, not basic first aid. Those techniques require specialized training and practical experience." Tyler Brooks, working alongside Rachel as her battle buddy, found himself increasingly convinced that they were dealing with someone whose background went far beyond anything in official records. The way she moves, the way she thinks about tactical problems, the medical knowledge, this isn't stuff you learn in basic training or even advanced individual training. This is special operations level expertise. Amy Johnson nodded, her own special forces background allowing her to recognize capabilities that civilian observers might miss. She's been in combat before, real combat, not just training exercises. The way she anticipates enemy movement, the fire discipline, the tactical decision-making under pressure, you don't develop those skills in peacetime. As the exercise reached its climax, Derek positioned himself where he could observe Rachel's team through direct line of sight rather than camera feeds. He'd identified a moment when the chaos of urban combat would provide cover for the kind of accident he was planning, and his finger rested near the trigger of his supposedly unloaded observation rifle. But Rachel's tactical awareness extended beyond the official exercise parameters. Some instinct developed through years of operating in hostile territory made her conscious of Derek's position and the threat he represented. Without appearing to do so, she maneuvered her team to positions that would make Derek's planned accident impossible to execute without obvious premeditation. The exercise concluded with Rachel's team having achieved all mission objectives while suffering minimal casualties and protecting all civilian hostages. It was a perfect performance that left no doubt about her exceptional capabilities, but it also pushed Derek's desperation to the breaking point. "Debriefing in 15 minutes, Derek announced, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Thompson, you'll present your team's after-action report to the full assembly. Hope you're ready to explain some of your more creative tactical decisions." Rachel nodded calmly, but several observers noticed subtle changes in her posture and positioning. She was preparing for something, though what remained unclear to everyone except Agent Davis, who recognized the signs of an operative preparing for cover exposure. The debriefing assembly took place in the main briefing auditorium, with all exercise participants, instructors, and senior staff present. Rachel stood at the front podium, still wearing her combat gear and the gray t-shirt that had become her signature uniform, ready to present her team's tactical decisions to the assembled military professionals. Derek positioned himself prominently in the front row, his questions prepared and his strategy designed to force Rachel into responses that would reveal knowledge inconsistent with her supposed background. He intended to expose her as some kind of fraud or security risk, providing justification for her immediate removal from the program. "Thompson," Derek began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium, "your team's approach to the hostage situation deviated significantly from standard doctrine. Where exactly did you learn those tactics?" Rachel's response was measured and professional, but it contained technical details about urban warfare that revealed extensive study and practical application. She described enemy psychology, weapon capabilities, and tactical considerations, with the kind of authority that came from actual experience rather than theoretical knowledge. "That's very impressive theoretical knowledge," Derek pressed, his tone becoming increasingly aggressive. "But urban combat isn't learned from textbooks. Those kinds of skills require practical experience in actual hostile environments. So, where exactly have you been deployed?" The question hung in the air like smoke from gunfire, and everyone in the auditorium recognized it as more than routine curiosity. Derek was making direct accusations about Rachel's background and official records, challenging her credibility in front of the entire assembly. Rachel remained calm under the pressure, but several observers noticed micro-expressions that suggested she was calculating responses and preparing for escalation. "My experience comes from comprehensive training and professional instruction," she replied, but the answer was clearly insufficient for Derek's purposes. "Professional instruction from whom?" Derek demanded, rising from his seat with theatrical aggression. "Because I've checked every training record, every instructor certification, every advanced school graduation list for the past 5 years. Your name doesn't appear anywhere. So either our record keeping is completely incompetent or you're lying about your qualifications." Colonel Patterson attempted to intervene. "Captain Williams, this isn't the appropriate venue for personnel investigations. If you have concerns about record accuracy, they should be addressed through proper channels." But Derek was beyond rational decision-making, driven by paranoia and desperation to expose Rachel before she could expose him. "No, sir, this is exactly the right venue. We have someone here claiming expertise she shouldn't possess, demonstrating capabilities that don't match her official background. That's a security issue that affects everyone in this room." Derek moved closer to the podium, using his size and aggressive posture to intimidate Rachel in front of the assembled audience. "So, let's try this again, Thompson. Who trained you? What unit did you serve with? And why are your records so mysteriously incomplete?" Rachel stood her ground, but the tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Military personnel recognized the signs of confrontation that could turn violent without warning, and several instructors began positioning themselves to intervene if necessary. Agent Davis, monitoring from the back of the auditorium, spoke quietly into a concealed microphone. "Control. This is Overwatch. Situation is escalating beyond parameters. Request authorization for direct intervention." The response was immediate and decisive. "Overwatch, Control. You are authorized to protect asset integrity. Use whatever measures necessary." But before Davis could act, Derek made the decision that would finally expose the truth he'd been desperately trying to hide. Frustrated by Rachel's continued composure and driven by psychological needs that went beyond rational thought, he grabbed her by the shoulders, intending to physically intimidate her into confession or breakdown. The gray t-shirt, already worn thin by repeated washing and training exercises, couldn't withstand Derek's violent grip. The fabric tore from shoulder to elbow with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the suddenly silent auditorium. And that's when everything changed. The tattoo revealed by the torn fabric was a masterwork of military art, a coiled black serpent with scales so detailed they seemed to move in the fluorescent lighting. The snake's body wrapped around Rachel's upper arm in a spiral pattern that spoke of hours under the needle, but it was the additional elements that made the assembly freeze in recognition and growing horror. Embedded within the serpent's coils was military insignia that most of the audience recognized but hoped they'd never see: the Shadow Viper unit patch, supposedly retired when the unit was disbanded after catastrophic mission failure. Below the main design, in precise military lettering, were the words Unit 7, and a date that corresponded exactly to the classified operation that had resulted in the unit's official destruction. But it was the smaller details that made the most experienced military professionals in the room step back in involuntary respect and fear. Each scale on the serpent contained a tiny initial, and those who understood Shadow Viper operations knew they represented fallen team members. The snake's eyes were rendered as hollow voids, speaking of losses that went beyond physical death into territory that most soldiers never had to contemplate. The silence that followed the tattoo's exposure lasted exactly 3 seconds, long enough for everyone present to process what they were seeing and understand its implications. Then Amy Johnson gasped audibly, her Special Forces background allowing her to recognize significance that others might miss. "Holy cow," she whispered, but in the profound quiet her words carried clearly. "Shadow Viper 7. She's real." Colonel Patterson's face drained of color as he processed the implications. Shadow Viper operatives were legendary figures in special operations circles, warriors whose exploits were whispered about but never officially acknowledged. If Rachel Thompson was Shadow Viper 7, her presence at Fort Davidson represented something far more significant than routine training. Derek stumbled backward, his aggressive posture dissolving into something approaching terror as he understood for the first time exactly who he'd been trying to intimidate and eliminate. Shadow Viper operatives were trained killers whose capabilities went beyond anything conventional military training produced, and Derek's attempts to stage an accident suddenly seemed not just criminal, but pathetically inadequate. Tyler Brooks dropped his training materials, his hands shaking as he stared at the exposed tattoo. "Shadow Viper was classified as completely eliminated," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "All members killed in action during Operation Dark Serpent. If she's alive." "Then the mission reports were falsified," completed Master Sergeant Thompson, his 30 years of experience allowing him to understand implications that younger soldiers were still processing. Which means someone wanted Shadow Viper eliminated for reasons that had nothing to do with enemy action. Agent Davis stepped forward from her position at the back of the auditorium, her movement purposeful and decisive. "Rachel Thompson is operating under classified authority," she announced, producing credentials that identified her as Defense Intelligence Agency. "This operation has been authorized at the highest levels of military command." But Rachel herself seemed transformed by the exposure of her true identity. The uncertain recruit persona had disappeared completely, replaced by something harder and more focused. When she spoke, her voice carried an authority that made even senior officers straighten unconsciously to attention. "Captain Derek Williams," she said, and her tone was calm but carried undertones that made everyone in the auditorium understand they were witnessing something historic. "You've been under investigation for treason, conspiracy, and the murder of 6 Shadow Viper operatives. The evidence gathered during this operation is sufficient for military tribunal and execution." Derek's face cycled through denial, rage, and growing panic as he processed Rachel's words. "That's impossible," he stammered. "Shadow Viper was eliminated by enemy action. The intelligence reports clearly showed." "The intelligence reports you helped falsify," Rachel interrupted, her voice cutting through his protests like a blade. "Operation Dark Serpent was compromised because someone provided enemy forces with exact mission parameters, team composition, and extraction coordinates. 6 of the most highly trained soldiers in the military died because you sold that information for $50,000. The auditorium erupted in shocked whispers and angry murmurs as the assembled military personnel processed the accusations. Treason was the ultimate military crime, but treason that resulted in the deaths of elite operatives was something that demanded immediate and decisive justice. Colonel Patterson's voice cut through the chaos with military authority. "Security personnel, place Captain Williams under immediate arrest. Full investigation protocols are now in effect." But Derek, driven by desperation and the knowledge that arrest meant certain death, made one final attempt to regain control of the situation. His hand moved toward his sidearm, military training taking over as he calculated his chances of fighting his way out of an impossible situation. Rachel saw the movement before it was halfway complete, her combat reflexes triggering responses that had been honed through years of life-or-death encounters. She moved with liquid grace, crossing the distance between them in less time than it took Derek to clear his weapon from its holster. The disarming technique she used was so swift and efficient that most observers missed the actual mechanics of what happened. Derek's weapon was in his hand one moment and flying across the room the next, while Derek himself was face down on the floor with his arm twisted at an angle that spoke of immediate and complete submission. "Don't move," Rachel commanded, her knee positioned precisely to control Derek's breathing without causing permanent damage. "Military police are en route, and I'd prefer to deliver you alive for trial." Agent Davis approached with restraints, her expression professional but carrying undertones of satisfaction. "Outstanding work, 7. The investigation can now proceed to final phases." As Derek was secured and prepared for transport to military detention, Rachel stood and addressed the assembled audience with words that would be remembered and quoted for years afterward. "Shadow Viper Unit 7 died 3 years ago in Afghanistan," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the silent auditorium. "What you see before you is what's left after betrayal, investigation, and justice. Real strength doesn't announce itself, doesn't demand recognition, doesn't need to prove its worth to anyone. It simply serves until the mission is complete." The medical examination that followed Derek's arrest revealed evidence that corroborated Rachel's accusations and provided additional insights into the depth of his criminal activities. Financial records seized from his quarters showed deposits corresponding exactly to the dates when Shadow Viper operational security was compromised, while encrypted communications revealed ongoing contact with foreign intelligence services. But perhaps more damaging were the psychological evaluation reports that painted a picture of someone whose need for dominance and control had evolved into pathological obsession with power over others. Derek's perfect military record had masked personality disorders that made him susceptible to recruitment by hostile intelligence services willing to exploit his psychological weaknesses. Dr. Wilson's medical assessment revealed physical evidence of prolonged stress and paranoid behavior that supported the timeline of Derek's criminal activities. "He's been living with the knowledge of what he'd done for 3 years, she reported to Colonel Patterson. The psychological pressure of maintaining his cover while knowing he'd murdered 6 elite soldiers was destroying him from the inside. If this revelation gave you chills, you need to see what happens next in our upcoming videos. Subscribe and ring that bell because Rachel's story is far from over, and trust me, the next chapter will leave you speechless." The consequences of Derek's exposure rippled through Fort Davidson with the force of an earthquake, reshaping relationships and hierarchies that had seemed permanent just hours before. The immediate impact was obvious: arrest, court-martial proceedings, and the dismantling of Derek's carefully constructed network of supporters and enablers. But the deeper implications were more complex and far-reaching. Rachel's investigation had revealed corruption that extended beyond Derek's individual crimes into institutional failures that had allowed such betrayal to occur undetected for years. Tyler Brooks found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about military service and loyalty. If someone like Derek could operate at this level for 3 years without detection, he confided to Amy Johnson, how many others might be out there? How can we trust anyone in positions of authority? Amy's response reflected the wisdom that came from her own Special Forces experience. We can't trust titles or reputations or official records. We can only trust demonstrated character and proven actions under pressure. Rachel showed us who she really was through what she did, not what she claimed to be. The investigation's scope expanded rapidly as military intelligence analysts examined Derek's activities and associations for additional security compromises. What they discovered was a network of corruption that had touched multiple installations and compromised numerous operations over several years. Colonel Patterson faced the challenging task of rebuilding institutional trust while implementing security measures that would prevent similar betrayals in the future. The Shadow Viper investigation has exposed systematic vulnerabilities in our personnel security protocols, he announced during an all-hands briefing. Every aspect of our security clearance and monitoring procedures will be reviewed and strengthened. Master Sergeant Thompson, whose 30 years of experience had made him a repository of institutional knowledge, was tasked with developing new training protocols based on lessons learned from Rachel's operation. We need to teach soldiers how to recognize the difference between legitimate authority and manipulative control, he explained to his instructor cadre. Derek's psychological techniques worked because people wanted to believe in strong leadership, even when that leadership was fundamentally corrupt. The base's junior personnel, particularly those who had witnessed Derek's humiliation of Rachel, underwent a profound shift in their understanding of military values and professional conduct. Many found themselves examining their own behavior and questioning their assumptions about strength, leadership, and respect. Private Rodriguez, who had initially followed Derek's lead in mocking Rachel, approached her during a quiet moment after the formal investigations had concluded. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying genuine remorse. "I owe you an apology. I let myself get caught up in group dynamics and treated you badly based on assumptions that were completely wrong." Rachel's response reflected the wisdom that came from years of operating in hostile environments where human psychology could determine mission success or failure. "The important thing is that you recognized the pattern and chose to break it," she told him. "That kind of moral courage is what separates professional soldiers from armed thugs." The formal military tribunal that followed Derek's arrest was conducted with the kind of thoroughness that serious treason charges demanded. Evidence presented during the proceedings painted a detailed picture of how foreign intelligence services had identified and exploited Derek's psychological vulnerabilities to gain access to highly classified information. The financial evidence was particularly damning, a trail of payments that corresponded exactly to compromised operations and resulted friendly casualties. Each transaction represented real soldiers who had died because Derek valued money more than the lives of his fellow warriors. But perhaps most damaging to Derek's defense were the recordings of his own words, captured through surveillance equipment that Rachel had placed throughout Fort Davidson during her undercover investigation. His cruel mockery of Rachel, his attempts to arrange a training accident, and his ongoing communication with foreign handlers provided undeniable proof of his criminal activities and corrupt character. The tribunal's verdict was unanimous and swift, guilty on all charges, with a sentence of death by military execution. But Derek's legal troubles were only beginning, as federal prosecutors prepared additional charges related to espionage and murder that would ensure his crimes were fully addressed by both military and civilian justice systems. Rachel testified during the tribunal proceedings with the same calm professionalism she'd shown throughout her time at Fort Davidson. Her account of the investigation, supported by extensive documentation and physical evidence, provided a masterclass in undercover operations and intelligence gathering techniques. Shadow Viper 7 operated under deep cover for 8 months, she explained to the tribunal panel. During that time, she identified the source of intelligence leaks that had compromised multiple special operations, documented the methods used to recruit and handle assets within the military, and gathered sufficient evidence to prosecute not only Captain Williams, but his entire network of collaborators. The institutional changes that followed the Derek Williams case extended far beyond Fort Davidson to impact military installations and training programs throughout the Defense Department. Rachel's investigation had revealed vulnerabilities in personnel security protocols that demanded comprehensive reforms and new approaches to identifying potential insider threats. New psychological evaluation procedures were implemented to identify personality disorders that made individuals susceptible to foreign recruitment. Enhanced monitoring systems were installed to detect unusual financial activities and communication patterns that might indicate intelligence gathering or asset handling. Most importantly, training programs were developed to help military personnel recognize and report suspicious behavior patterns that might indicate security compromises. But perhaps the most significant change was cultural, a renewed emphasis on the military values of integrity, service, and sacrifice that Derek's crimes had violated so egregiously. Rachel's example of quiet professionalism and dedication to duty became a teaching tool used throughout the military to illustrate what real warrior ethos looked like in practice. Amy Johnson, promoted to captain in recognition of her support during the investigation, established new training protocols based on lessons learned from Rachel's operation. The Derek Williams case taught us that real threats often come from people who appear most trustworthy, she explained to her new command. We need to evaluate character through actions, not words or appearances. The Shadow Viper program itself underwent significant changes in response to Rachel's successful mission and the intelligence gathered during her investigation. What had been considered a failed unit with all members killed in action was reconstituted as an elite investigation and counterintelligence capability designed to identify and eliminate insider threats throughout the special operations community. Rachel was offered command of the new Shadow Viper unit, with resources and authority that would allow her to expand her investigative capabilities to a global scale. The offer represented recognition of her exceptional skills and proven dedication, but it also meant continuing the dangerous and isolated existence that had defined her life for the past 3 years. The decision she faced was complicated by personal considerations that went beyond professional obligation. 3 years of deep cover operations had taken their toll, leaving her with psychological scars that matched the physical ones hidden beneath her clothing. The question was whether she had the strength and motivation to continue fighting a war that seemed to have no clear end. During her final debriefing session, Colonel Patterson asked the question that everyone involved in the case was wondering about. What's next for Shadow Viper 7? The new unit needs experienced leadership, and there's no one more qualified than you to take on that responsibility. Rachel's response revealed the depth of character that had made her exceptional as an undercover operative and would continue to guide her future decisions. The mission isn't complete until every threat is eliminated and every betrayal is answered, she said. Shadow Viper 7 will continue to serve until that mission is accomplished, regardless of personal cost or sacrifice. The ceremony that followed was small and private, attended only by those with sufficient security clearance to know about Shadow Viper operations and the investigation that had brought Derek Williams to justice. Rachel stood at attention as Colonel Patterson pinned new insignia to her uniform, officially recognizing her promotion to Major and her appointment as commanding officer of the reconstituted Shadow Viper unit. But the moment that would be remembered longest came when Master Sergeant Thompson, speaking for the enlisted personnel who had witnessed Rachel's transformation from apparent victim to revealed warrior, offered words that summarized the lessons learned during her time at Fort Davidson. "Ma'am," he said, his voice carrying the respect that 30 years of military service had taught him to reserve for truly exceptional leaders, "you've shown us that real strength doesn't need to announce itself. Real courage doesn't require recognition, and real warriors serve regardless of whether anyone knows their name or understands their sacrifice. It's been an honor to witness your mission and learn from your example." Rachel's response was characteristically brief, but carried the weight of someone who had earned the right to speak with absolute authority about military service and sacrifice. "The honor is mine, Sergeant. Every day I serve alongside professionals like you reminds me why this mission matters and why some prices are worth paying." The reception that followed was subdued, reflecting the serious nature of the events that had brought them together. But there was also an underlying sense of satisfaction and renewal, the feeling that justice had been served and institutional integrity had been restored through the dedicated efforts of professionals who took their oaths seriously. As the evening progressed, small groups formed throughout the venue, with conversations focusing on the lessons learned from Derek's betrayal and Rachel's investigation. Senior officers discussed policy changes and procedural improvements, while junior personnel explored questions about loyalty, authority, and moral courage that would shape their future development as military professionals. Tyler Brooks found himself in deep conversation with Amy Johnson about the psychological dynamics that had allowed Derek to maintain his facade for so long. "The scariest part," he observed, "is how easily we accepted his version of leadership and authority. He was charismatic and confident, and we wanted to believe in strong leadership so badly that we ignored warning signs." Amy nodded, her Special Forces background providing insights into the complexities of command relationships and unit dynamics. "That's why Rachel's example is so important. She showed us what real leadership looks like: quiet confidence, competence demonstrated through actions, and loyalty that flows upward to the mission rather than downward to personal ego." Private Rodriguez, who had undergone perhaps the most dramatic transformation during the investigation, spoke with several other junior enlisted personnel about the importance of moral courage and independent thinking. "I learned that following orders doesn't mean turning off your brain or your conscience," he explained. "Real military discipline requires thinking soldiers who can distinguish between legitimate authority and manipulation." Agent Davis, whose role in the operation was now publicly acknowledged, discussed the complexities of interagency cooperation and the challenges of conducting investigations within military environments. The success of this operation depended on coordination between multiple organizations and the willingness of military professionals to support law enforcement activities, even when they conflicted with traditional command relationships. But throughout the evening, attention kept returning to Rachel herself, whose transformation from apparent victim to revealed warrior had become the central narrative of the entire investigation. Her calm professionalism and quiet competence had impressed everyone who worked with her, but more importantly, her dedication to justice and willingness to sacrifice personal comfort for mission success had reminded them all why they chose military service in the first place. As the reception wound down and participants began preparing to return to their regular duties, Colonel Patterson approached Rachel with a final question that addressed the elephant in the room. What came next for someone whose cover had been blown and whose future missions would require new approaches and different methodologies? The Shadow Viper reconstitution gives you resources and authority you've never had before, he noted, but it also makes you a target for every foreign intelligence service that wants to eliminate someone who's proven capable of uncovering their operations. How do you plan to balance operational effectiveness with personal security? Rachel's response demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had made her successful as an undercover operative and would continue to guide her decisions as unit commander. Visibility has advantages as well as disadvantages, she observed. Foreign intelligence services now know that Shadow Viper exists and is actively hunting insider threats, which will make their recruitment and handling activities more difficult and expensive. Sometimes the best way to fight in the shadows is to let your enemies know you're there. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a secure communication from Washington, delivered by courier and requiring Rachel's immediate attention. As she opened the classified envelope, her expression shifted slightly, reflecting the kind of focused intensity that her colleagues had learned to recognize as preparation for action. New intelligence has identified potential security compromises at 3 additional installations, she announced to the assembled group. Shadow Viper 7 has been tasked with immediate investigation and resolution. The mission continues. The words carried weight that went beyond their literal meaning, serving as both warning and promise. Warning to anyone who might consider betraying their oaths for personal gain, and promise to the dedicated professionals who deserve to serve alongside colleagues they could trust with their lives. As Rachel prepared to depart Fort Davidson for her next assignment, she took a final moment to visit the memorial wall where photographs of fallen soldiers reminded everyone of the ultimate cost of military service. Among those photos were images of her Shadow Viper teammates, officially killed in action but actually murdered by betrayal and greed. Standing before their photographs, Rachel spoke words that only she could hear, but that carried the weight of 3 years of investigation and the promise of continued vigilance. Mission accomplished, team. Derek Williams has been eliminated, his network has been dismantled, and Shadow Viper is operational again. But the war continues, and 7 will keep fighting until every threat is neutralized and every betrayal is answered. The memorial wall bore witness to her oath, just as it had witnessed countless other promises made by warriors who understood that some fights were worth any sacrifice, and some prices were worth paying regardless of personal cost. Her encrypted phone vibrated with an incoming message, the sound barely audible in the quiet memorial space. Rachel glanced at the display, noting the Moscow area code and the coded identifier that meant her next mission was already beginning. "Shadow 7, she answered, her voice carrying the professional calm that had become her trademark. "We have a situation in Eastern Europe," came the reply, delivered in the clipped tones of someone accustomed to discussing life and death matters with clinical detachment. "Multiple assets have gone dark, and intelligence suggests Shadow Viper techniques are being used against our operations. We need you in Berlin within 72 hours. Rachel processed the information with the kind of strategic analysis that had made her exceptional at undercover work. If enemy forces were using Shadow Viper techniques, it suggested that Derek Williams hadn't been working alone, and that other members of her supposedly eliminated unit might still be alive and operating under hostile control. "Understood," she replied. 7 will be wheels up in 6 hours. Forward all available intelligence to my secure terminal." As she ended the call, Rachel took one final look around Fort Davidson, the place where she'd spent 3 months living as someone else while hunting the man who'd murdered her team. The investigation was complete, justice had been served, but the larger war against betrayal and corruption would continue as long as there were people willing to sell out their comrades for personal gain. The gray t-shirt that had become her signature during the undercover operation was carefully folded and placed in her gear bag, a reminder of the person she'd pretended to be and the lessons learned during those months of apparent vulnerability. But the black serpent tattoo coiled around her right arm remained visible, a permanent declaration of her true identity and unshakable commitment to the mission that had come to define her life. Shadow Viper 7 departed Fort Davidson as quietly as she'd arrived, leaving behind an institution that had been fundamentally changed by her presence, and a group of military professionals who would never again make assumptions about strength, leadership, or the price of service based solely on appearances. But she also left with new questions that would drive her next investigation and possibly provide answers to mysteries that had haunted her since the day her original team was betrayed and murdered in the mountains of Afghanistan. If other Shadow Viper operatives were alive and operating under hostile control, then the mission that had started with Derek Williams was far from complete. The aircraft that carried her toward Berlin and her next assignment also carried the hopes and trust of countless military professionals who had learned through her example that real warriors came in many forms, that true strength often appeared weak until tested, and that justice, no matter how long delayed, would eventually find those who betrayed their oaths and murdered their brothers. As the lights of Fort Davidson disappeared beneath the aircraft's wings, Major Rachel Thompson, Shadow Viper 7, hunter of traitors and protector of the innocent, began planning her next mission in the endless war against those who would sell out their comrades for personal gain. The black serpent coiled around her arm seemed to pulse in the cabin lighting, a living reminder that some fights never ended and some warriors never stopped hunting until every enemy was eliminated and every betrayal was answered with appropriate justice. In the distance, carried by encrypted communication networks and whispered conversations in secure facilities around the world, word spread that Shadow Viper was operational again and actively hunting insider threats throughout the special operations community. For those who served with honor and integrity, the news brought comfort and renewed confidence in the institutions they'd sworn to protect. But for those who had betrayed their oaths or considered doing so, the message was clear and unmistakable. Shadow Viper was watching, Shadow Viper was hunting, and Shadow Viper never stopped until the mission was complete. The aircraft banked toward the east, carrying its deadly passenger toward new battles in the endless war between those who served with honor and those who betrayed that service for personal gain. Behind them, Fort Davidson settled into normal routine, forever changed by 3 months of deception, investigation, and ultimate revelation. But in the quiet hours before dawn, when security patrols walked their routes and sentries maintained their vigilance, some claimed they could still feel a presence, the lingering awareness that true warriors came in many forms, and that strength, real strength, often appeared weak until the moment when weakness was revealed as the most dangerous deception of all. The mission continued, as it always had and always would, carried forward by those who understood that some prices were worth paying and some fights were worth any sacrifice to ensure that honor, integrity, and loyalty remained more than just words carved in stone or printed in manuals. Shadow Viper 7 was operational again, and the enemies of freedom and justice had reason to fear the quiet professionals who served in shadows, while others slept safely in their beds, protected by warriors they would never know existed, until the moment when their protection was tested by those who threatened the very foundations of the civilization they defended. The gray t-shirt folded carefully in the gear bag served as a reminder that appearances could deceive, and that underestimation, while dangerous for those who practiced it, could be the most powerful weapon in the arsenal of those who served something greater than themselves. As the aircraft disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness, carrying its cargo of dedication, skill, and unshakable commitment toward new battles in the endless war against betrayal and corruption, the legend of the woman who appeared weak until strength was required continued to grow throughout the military community. And in secure briefing rooms and classified training facilities around the world, instructors would use her example to teach new generations of warriors that real strength came not from dominance or intimidation, but from quiet competence, unshakable integrity, and the willingness to serve regardless of recognition or reward. The mission was complete. The mission was just beginning, and Shadow Viper 7 would continue to hunt until every threat was eliminated, and every betrayal was answered with the kind of justice that only true warriors could deliver. 3 months after Rachel's departure from Fort Davidson, the ripple effects of Operation Shadow Hunt continued to reshape military institutions across multiple continents. The Derek Williams case had become required study material at every major military academy, intelligence school, and leadership development program throughout the Department of Defense. At Fort Benning, Captain Amy Johnson stood before a classroom of aspiring special operations candidates, using Rachel's investigation as a case study in recognizing insider threats and the danger of assumptions based on appearance. The most dangerous enemy, she told her students, is often the one who looks most like a friend, while your most valuable ally might be the person everyone else overlooks. The psychological evaluation protocols developed in response to Derek's betrayal had identified 17 additional security risks across various installations, each representing potential catastrophic intelligence breaches that had been prevented through lessons learned from Rachel's methodical investigation. The financial cost of these enhanced security measures ran into hundreds of millions of dollars, but the human cost of another Shadow Viper-style betrayal would have been incalculable. Tyler Brooks, now serving as a training instructor himself, had developed new curricula focused on moral courage and independent thinking within military command structures. His personal experience watching Derek's manipulation techniques had given him unique insights into how charismatic but corrupt leaders could exploit unit dynamics for personal gain. Authority must be earned through demonstrated competence and integrity, he explained to his students during a leadership seminar. The moment you start following orders because someone has rank, rather than because those orders serve legitimate military purposes, you've stopped being a professional soldier and become something much more dangerous. Private Rodriguez, whose transformation during Rachel's investigation had been among the most dramatic, was selected for advanced intelligence training based on his demonstrated ability to recognize and adapt to changing circumstances. His written analysis of the psychological factors that had allowed Derek to maintain his facade for 3 years became standard reading material for counterintelligence specialists. But perhaps the most significant institutional change was the establishment of the Shadow Viper Protocol, a comprehensive system for identifying, investigating, and eliminating insider threats that drew directly from Rachel's operational methods and tactical innovations. Military installations worldwide now maintain teams of specially trained investigators who could operate under deep cover to identify security compromises before they resulted in operational casualties. Master Sergeant Thompson, approaching retirement after his 30-year career, found himself in the unexpected position of being the primary instructor for these new Shadow Viper teams. His decades of experience with special operations training provided the foundation for curricula that combined traditional military skills with advanced investigation techniques and psychological warfare capabilities. What Major Thompson accomplished at Fort Davidson, he explained to his first class of Shadow Viper trainees, wasn't just exceptional individual performance. It was a masterclass in patience, deception, and strategic thinking that we can teach and replicate. The goal is to develop multiple operatives with similar capabilities, creating a network that can respond to insider threats anywhere in the world. Meanwhile, in Berlin, Rachel's new investigation was uncovering connections between Derek's network and a much larger conspiracy that extended throughout NATO military structures. The intelligence she'd gathered during her months at Fort Davidson was proving invaluable in identifying patterns of recruitment and operation that had been invisible when viewed from traditional counterintelligence perspectives. Her encrypted reports back to Washington painted a disturbing picture of systematic infiltration that went far beyond individual cases of corruption or betrayal. Foreign intelligence services had been conducting a decades-long campaign to place assets within Western military structures, using psychological manipulation and financial incentives to create networks of compromised personnel at every level of command. The Berlin operation had already resulted in the identification of 12 compromised officers across 6 different countries, each representing a potential intelligence disaster that could have compromised ongoing operations and resulted in the deaths of countless military personnel and intelligence assets. Colonel Patterson, now serving as director of the new Shadow Viper program, received Rachel's reports with a mixture of admiration for her investigative capabilities and growing concern about the scope of the threats she was uncovering. Each successful mission seemed to reveal new layers of corruption and betrayal that suggested the Derek Williams case had been merely the tip of a much larger iceberg. Major Thompson's work in Berlin has identified what appears to be a coordinated campaign of infiltration and subversion, he reported during a classified briefing to senior Pentagon leadership. The implications go beyond individual cases of treason to suggest systematic compromise of our most sensitive operations and capabilities. The response from Washington was immediate and decisive. Unlimited resources and authority for Shadow Viper expansion, with Rachel designated as the primary operational commander for what was now classified as a global counterintelligence campaign. The quiet woman who had arrived at Fort Davidson in a gray t-shirt and worn boots was now responsible for protecting military operations throughout the free world. But success came with a price that extended beyond the physical dangers of operating in hostile territory. Rachel's psychological evaluation reports, classified at levels that ensured only the most senior leadership would ever see them, painted a picture of someone whose dedication to the mission was gradually consuming every other aspect of her identity. Dr. Wilson, who had been assigned as Rachel's primary psychological support specialist, noted concerning patterns in her subject's behavioral assessments. Major Thompson demonstrates exceptional operational capabilities and unwavering commitment to mission success, she wrote in one evaluation. However, her psychological profile suggests increasing isolation from normal human relationships and emotional connections. The persona she developed during undercover operations appears to be becoming her primary identity, with concerning implications for long-term psychological stability. The warning was noted but not acted upon. The threats Rachel was identifying and neutralizing were too significant, and her capabilities too unique, for leadership to consider removing her from operational status based on psychological concerns that remained theoretical rather than immediately practical. Agent Davis, who had become Rachel's primary intelligence liaison and one of her few remaining personal connections, attempted to address these concerns during their regular coordination meetings. "You're carrying the weight of every operation, every threat, every potential betrayal on your own shoulders," she observed during one secure video conference. "That's not sustainable, even for someone with your capabilities." Rachel's response reflected the psychological transformation that Dr. Wilson had documented in her evaluations. "The mission requirements haven't changed," she said simply. "The threats are real, the consequences of failure are unacceptable, and the capabilities required to address them are specialized. Personal sustainability is a secondary consideration." The conversation was interrupted by incoming intelligence that would drive Rachel's next operation and further demonstrate both her exceptional abilities and the psychological cost of the burden she carried. 3 Shadow Viper operatives who had been declared killed in action during the original Operation Dark Serpent had been identified as alive and operating under hostile control in Eastern European locations. The implications were staggering. If Derek Williams had not been working alone, if other members of Rachel's original team had been captured rather than killed, then the conspiracy she was investigating extended far beyond financial corruption into territory that challenged the fundamental assumptions about loyalty, identity, and the lengths to which enemy intelligence services would go to compromise Western military operations. Rachel's reaction to this intelligence was immediate and decisive. "I need full operational authority and resources for a multinational investigation," she informed Colonel Patterson during an emergency secure communication. "If Shadow Viper operatives are being used against our own operations, then every mission they've been involved with is compromised, and every asset they have identified is in immediate danger." The authorization came within hours, along with resources that reflected the gravity of the situation and the confidence that senior leadership placed in Rachel's abilities. What had begun as a routine investigation into training irregularities at Fort Davidson had evolved into a global operation with implications that could reshape international intelligence cooperation and military security protocols. As Rachel prepared for what would prove to be her most dangerous and complex mission yet, she took a moment to reflect on the path that had brought her from the apparent victim of Derek Williams' cruelty to the primary architect of a worldwide counterintelligence campaign. The gray t-shirt that had once symbolized her vulnerability now served as a reminder of the power of appearing weak until strength was required, and the black serpent tattoo coiled around her arm had become a symbol recognized and respected throughout the intelligence community. The mission that had begun with the simple goal of identifying the source of intelligence leaks had revealed a conspiracy that threatened the security of every Western military operation. The investigation that had started with one corrupt officer had exposed a network of betrayal that extended throughout multiple countries and military organizations. But perhaps most importantly, the woman who had once endured mockery and humiliation while hunting her prey had demonstrated that real strength came not from dominance or intimidation, but from patience, competence, and the unwavering commitment to serve something greater than personal comfort or recognition. Shadow Viper 7 was no longer just an individual operative. She had become a symbol of everything that military service could represent at its highest levels, and a warning to anyone who might consider betraying their oaths for personal gain. The mission continued, the threats evolved, but the fundamental truth remained unchanged. Real warriors served in silence until the moment when silence was no longer sufficient, and justice, no matter how long delayed, would eventually find those who betrayed their brothers and sold their souls for silver. The legend of the woman in the gray t-shirt spread through military communities worldwide, carried not through official channels or classified reports, but through the quiet conversations of soldiers who understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. In barracks and training facilities across 6 continents, instructors would tell the story of Shadow Viper 7, not as entertainment, but as education in the truest meaning of military service. Young recruits learned that heroism didn't require recognition, that strength could appear as vulnerability until circumstances demanded otherwise, and that the most dangerous warrior in any room might be the one everyone else overlooked. The psychological impact of Rachel's example extended far beyond tactical considerations into the realm of character development and moral courage that formed the foundation of professional military service. At Fort Davidson, now designated as the primary Shadow Viper training facility, a new memorial wall honored not just those who had died in service, but those who served in shadows where their sacrifices would never be publicly acknowledged. Rachel's photograph held a place of honor, not for her individual achievements, but for what she represented: the countless professionals who chose duty over comfort, mission over recognition, and justice over personal safety. The inscription beneath her image contained words that would be memorized by every soldier who trained at the facility. Real strength whispers, while weakness shouts. True warriors serve without seeking glory, fight without demanding recognition, and sacrifice without expecting reward. In silence they stand guard, in shadows they hunt evil, and in dedication they find purpose that transcends individual ambition. As military historians would later note, the Shadow Viper case marked a turning point in how Western militaries understood and addressed internal threats. But more importantly, it demonstrated that the greatest victories were often won by those who appeared weakest until the moment when their strength was revealed to be more dangerous than any conventional weapon. Somewhere in the darkness between nations, Shadow Viper 7 continued her eternal hunt, carrying with her the hopes of every honest soldier and the fears of every traitor who thought their crimes would remain hidden forever.